So I guess what I plan to talk about is the use of evidence, but I mean, it's important to emphasize the current context. The current context is one where all over the world, the combination of the pandemic and the war in Ukraine are playing havoc, and the estimates of about nearly 100 million people moving into poverty is obviously extremely concerning. It's a place where, I mean, when it happened, when the pandemic happened, the work we do in JPAL of running randomized controlled trials was a little bit handicapped, since it requires collecting data, and suddenly nobody was going anywhere, nobody was meeting anybody, no data was being collected. So in some sense, it created a moment for us to think about what we do. And we realized that even though we were all stuck at home, there were things we could do. And among the things we could do were, we did a series of studies on how to influence people's behavior on relative to COVID-19, and that was something that eventually, I think, gave us some pathways for improving the communication on COVID-19. So I think that was useful. But I think with that came also a concern that, there were so many things we were not doing, and I think the enormous economic shock, but also the shock to mobility, shock to global production structures, that's now, and in particular, it exposed, I think, very importantly, the fact that the way a lot of social protection structures were designed was a holdover from a past where, I mean, these kinds of massive pandemics, at least they either didn't happen, or if they happened, they were not taken into account when we did social policy. And I think it opened the world's mind to the fact that we need a new set of social policies, and a set of social policies that are more responsive to a world where shocks can come very fast. The war in Ukraine just started suddenly and have devastating consequences for so many people in so many places. So I think it's a good moment to rethink social policy and to think about what are the design issues with it. It's also happened that the social protection was massively expanded, and that's included in Spain. Spain, of course, as the minister said, I think in many countries, this raised many questions on, are we doing what are the kinds of programs we should adopt? And I think in the end, the fact that we now have a little bit of, for at least temporarily, more funding makes it, I think, very clear that this is the moment to try to use the new opportunities created by that to learn both about what new things we can do, but maybe also about what old things we should stop doing. And I think this is in some sense, for someone like me, this is a very exciting moment. And within that, of course, something happened. I'll continue. I think as you know, one of the key to our work is sort of randomized controlled trials. And randomized controlled trials are essentially a way to ask, how do you really know a program works? And I think there is but also, when it works, what makes it work? When it doesn't work, where does it fail? I think, and eventually, even if it works and even if it's a great program, is it something that we could do at scale? So all of those and all of those learnings are a result of running good experiments, running intelligently designed experiments, and sort of extracting the knowledge that they offer. So, I mean, again, just to repeat the obvious, what is a randomized controlled trial? It's the social science equivalent of medical trials. It's these experiments where some groups or some areas or some regions are assigned to one program, and maybe others are assigned to a different program or to nothing, and then we compare them to see what the program does. And the reason for randomizing is to be able to be credible in saying, in fact, this is what we discover from the evidence is indeed attributable to the intervention. These, I should say that unlike medical trials, these are often, medical trials are often carried out under highly controlled conditions. You know, you have to come to the hospital every day, take a pill. They choose populations and often pay them to get high response rates. You know, when you want to evaluate a social intervention, a minimum income program, you know, those operate on a massive scale. For example, the very important reason that if one person is getting some amount of money, that's very different from if everybody around him is getting a certain amount of money, because that creates very different demand conditions. So the interventions are, therefore the interventions often have to be carried out not with 60 people, millions of people. And a lot of social experiments cover, I mean, tens of thousands of people at least, and often millions of people. So that's in a sense, and therefore there are all kinds of concerns about, you know, how to implement these large experiments. And in a sense, working with governments makes that much easier, because the government does things at scale. So when you want to test something that's happening at scale, this is one of the attractions of working with government. There's been now 1,100 plus randomized evaluations in 93 countries that we in JPAL have done. You can see that they're all over the world, and they're in every area. In some sense, once you understand the principle is applicable to everything, in agriculture or crime and violence or education or gender or labor markets. The question is, you know, you have to define an appropriate intervention, but once you have it, the methodology is similar. So, the basic ideas are very similar. So the different dots represent different areas, and you can see they're all over the world and all over the domain, the broad domain of what we call anti-poverty interventions. This I said a little bit already, but I want to sort of underline one thing that I think is perhaps the main inspiration for the work we do. And that's the fact that despite our best intentions, I think it's easy to fall into a set of, you know, why are we doing things? This is how we do things. Why are we doing sort of inertia, or we have why are we doing this? It's my intuition that this works. Why are we doing this? It's because it's the, you know, the theory says this is what is going to be the right thing to do. None of those are wrong, of course. All of those are good starting points. But I think the main lesson, I would say, from these 1,100 randomized evaluations, if I had to take one single lesson away, is the fact that all of those are liable to be wrong. That in some sense, by being open-minded about what the answer could be, we're often surprised. We often learn that, all the things we thought were obvious were not obvious, and the things that actually turn out to be important are often different from the ones we expected. Therefore, to experiment with real openness to ideas, to include, this is why this is it's a critical that this is based on a conversation between many parties, the government, when the government is changing policy, but also with academics, like in Spain. I think it's wonderful that SEMFI has stepped up to the plate and has taken the responsibility of providing, being involved in the process, in the design of the experiments, in bringing the knowledge so bringing the knowledge from what we already know in the design of the policy. So I think that's critical, to be open-minded about, to bring in ideas from outside, and also to do work with social partners who often have experience and wisdom and street knowledge that also makes better policies. So I think the partnership that's evolving in Spain is a good example of what can be between academics, NGOs, and the government is, I think, is a good example of a process that creates a library of potential answers. And as long as we don't go to it with, a lot of ideology, I think this allows for the possibility of finding the right answer, because we try many different things. If the obvious doesn't work, we look for the non-obvious. We acknowledge that sometimes that, what we tried didn't work. Let me just, so there is this is something I'll keep coming back to, but just to highlight, just to give you a sense of what's the kind of work we've been doing in Europe. In France, there was a career counseling program which generated, jobs for those who got counseling. Sadly, those jobs came from people who didn't get the counseling. So it made it very clear, and that the experiment was designed to because it was concerned, there was exactly that concern that this kind of active labor market policy often has the consequence of just moving jobs around. I picked that example, but I want to emphasize that the typical message from our intervention is not that nothing works. In fact, lots of things work. We're not here to be naysayers. This is an intervention that's been tried both in France and Chile, of trying to increase, bring the parents more into the schools for low-income population, low-income, low-education populations, and we see that has consequences both on children's behavior and on academic outcomes. So in Italy, during the pandemic, there was actually before the pandemic, there was a concern about integrating students into the education structure, and I think a combination of career counseling and academic tutoring that was some JPAL affiliates came up with shows that there was a substantial effect on integration of the marginalized population in the education system. So these are examples of things in different domains that we do, some more psychological, some more economic. I want to give you a more elaborate example, and here I will turn away from Europe because it's work that I myself do. I'm now working on some in France on some social policy issues, but most of my work is from the rest of the world. So I give you an example of something that's very powerful, but the question is one that of great global importance, because it's one where I think you hear it everywhere, that the concern that free money makes people lazy. I already mentioned it, this idea that you should put the pressure on people, and I want to go through a little bit the evidence on that, because I think it has the global evidence on that, because I think it's so ideologically potent, this idea. So these are from a bunch of randomized controlled trials, which we put together. They're in different countries. You can see Honduras, Philippines, Mexico. The gray bars, for those who are too far to, are the people. These are from conditional cash transfers, where people were given money for, let's say, sending their children to school. And the question is, does that extra money, which is often quite a lot of money, make them work less? And the general point is that there is zero evidence that they work less. So it's not that free money is making people lazy. And yet, this is, as I was saying, an extraordinarily powerful idea. So during the pandemic, there was actually an interesting debate. The Trump administration was trying to give more money to those who were unemployed. One of the few, I think, good ideas the Trump administration had, if I may say so. But it was opposed by other Republicans and by the ideologues of the right, the Wall Street Journal opinion page being the most prominent example of that. And this quote was from the Wall Street Journal: if you pay people not to work, fewer will work. Except at Yale, it seems. Why did they say that? Well, turns out that the study that they happened upon, which was an excellent study by very prominent Yale economists, was of the government's economic support program. And they were looking at what happens to people who happen to be, who would get much more money by not working than if they worked. And these are different states, so different states had different levels of generosity, but all of these had a replacement rate where you would make more money by not working than you would. And what they show, if that vertical dashed line is the introduction of the pandemic, of course the pandemic reduced employment everywhere, but the introduction of the government program did nothing. If anything, you see eventually all the unemployment rates converge. So the fact that the government was paying people not to work had no effect on the fact of their work choices. You see, that same fact, there were 6 other studies of the same program, and they all found the same thing. That didn't, of course, stop the fact that the Republicans didn't let it happen. And so I think this is the headline from the New York Times. I say all that to say that, I think these ideas are often extraordinarily powerful, and the evidence is our only real, one has to keep repeating the evidence, because I think it's our only recourse against it. I think there's more work on this, and just to say, it's not just that if you give people money, they don't become lazy. They don't also spend it on alcohol. I mean, if anything, when people were given cash to their phones, typically, to that not very smart phone, but you can still receive cash in that. In Africa, a lot of people do. People became, they fed their children more, but they also worked harder, they invested more, they were less stressed. I think the idea that, going back to the beginning of my conversation with the Prime Minister, which I really enjoyed, there was, I think the idea that first order giving money to people just makes them less stressed, and I think that has to be kept in mind. Now, having said that, you can ask, this is very much the context of Spain today. You have now a generous program that gives money to a lot of people. The question is that enough? Are you doing the right thing? The Secretary General asked me this question before. I gave a kind of a temporary answer. Now I'll give you a longer and more. So I think the clear the reason why one would wonder if money is the same is partly because, as everybody knows, poverty is not one problem; it's many problems, and which is precisely why there is one solution is unlikely to be everything we need. And I think that's a part of that. Part of it is a sense of disempowerment. It's a sense of that nothing's improving in my life. Part of it is just a sense of helplessness. I am a single woman with not much education and 2 children, and which way am I supposed to go? You tell me that you just have to go find a job. How do I find a job? What do I do about my children? So there are some people are simply, they're from communities that are not very connected to the rest of society, and therefore for them it's very hard for them to understand even the rules of the game, how to participate fully in society. And new immigrants are, of course, a good example of that. So there's all kinds of reasons. And I'm going to give you an example of work that we've done. I've been involved in this, and who are these people, and what can we say about them? And it again goes back to a question that the Secretary General asked me. What are reasons that we want to transfer to the poor? And I think one important reason that for me to study this is the idea that actually poverty is a trap. That one particularly important reason to do something is that a lot of people are poor because they're poor, not for any reason that has anything to do with their abilities, their productivity, their qualities. They're just poor because once you're poor, it's just very hard to get out of it. And for example, I think one idea that has been around for a while is the idea that in order to get out of poverty, you have to make investments, and if you have no money, you can't borrow money. And if you can't borrow money, you can't make the investment. And I think that idea in reverse says, if you get a little bit of money, maybe, and this of course alludes to something I said before in the conversation with the Prime Minister, that maybe it's sometimes important to think about giving people lump sums of money rather than small amounts of money. They may, you give people some money, they have to use it to they might use it to start a business. If they start a business, they might make more money. That might allow them to expand their business, and that can start a virtuous cycle. I'll tell you a little bit about why I'm, about the evidence on that idea that there might actually be a poverty trap. And I think while the evidence is not going to be from Spain, I think it's important to keep that. I think that's a very powerful idea if it's true. And I have no idea whether that, the kind of evidence I'm going to tell you from India and Bangladesh and Ghana is going to be relevant to Spain, but it has to start a set of thoughts. That's where we all get started. We have to reset our imagination. We have to think of what are possibilities, and here's a possibility that's potentially exciting, even for Spain. If people are in a poverty trap, what do we do about it? So let me tell you a little bit more about that. So the idea of the intervention I tell you about is the intervention is called the graduation program. It's a bit of a strange name. It was invented by a Bangladeshi NGO called BRAC. It was one of the world's biggest NGOs. And it comes with the idea that it wanted to help the poorest of the poor graduate to normal poverty. And in the word graduate, there was a key hope, which is that when you graduate, you go one direction. You don't come back. Graduates, when you graduate from high school, you are graduated. You don't come back. So I think the idea that this is going to be a one-way way out of this extreme poverty was key to their motivation. The idea was that it was a program that, as I was saying, gave people a lump sum, but not lump sum in terms of money. It gave them a choice of assets, whatever asset they wanted within that amount of money. So they might want to start a little, let's say they want to become a hawker, they might actually buy their trinkets or garments and then carry them from village to village and sell them. So that so they needed the money to buy the original garments to sell. So that's the nature. But they also gave them some training, because a lot of these people, and some handholding. They lacked the confidence to be able to to be able to implement this. I remember talking to a woman who was in this particular program, and she said, well, the first I was going to buy some trinkets to sell in the villages, and the first I didn't know where to buy them. I had never been to a market. I never really I lived by begging, so I had no idea of. So somebody from the organization took me to the market. They showed me how to buy things. I bought things. I came back. I sold them. Then the next time I had to do it myself. So I went to the bus stop. I waited for the bus, but the bus never came. What do you mean the bus never came? Well, the first time I went, I went in a yellow bus, and the yellow bus never came. There were green buses. And then it turned out that she didn't know the idea of a number on a bus. The buses have numbers, and if you have to go, it's not the color of the bus that matters, but the number of the bus that matters. So she had to learn to read numbers in order to be. So it took some amount of these kinds of social help to get them started. There was some temporary cash assistance, small amounts of money to keep them from starving while they start their business. And there were randomized controlled trials in 7 countries. What was the theory? The theory could be either that there was this, you needed to invest enough to make it worthwhile, or that you were psychologically unable to take it on because you had never done something like this, you didn't have the confidence. So the program was intervening on both margins. It was an omnibus program which gave both psychological support and financial support. So I'll show you the results from one intervention. one of these 7 randomized controlled trials, though almost every one of them was successful. But I want to make one important point. So the blue bar is the control group. The red bar is the people who got the program. We followed them for 10 years after they got the asset and 8.5 years after they stopped getting anything, any help. And you can see that even 10 years later, they're 33% richer. Or 34, their earnings are 34% higher. So indeed, they were in a poverty trap. To the extent that one can tell, they were in a poverty trap. They got one push 10 years before. With that one push, 10 years later, they're still richer by 34%. And they've always been richer throughout. So that, in a sense, I think this is the kind of evidence that suggests that, yes, indeed, poor people are often in poverty traps. These are different countries, and you can see that in most countries, these are the, I think other than Honduras, where there was really no success, in all the countries, you see after 3 years, and now we know after 7 years, that the program generated, the people who got the program were better off than the people who didn't. So this is, I think, very compelling evidence. Then the same, in fact, the same results. There's a separate study of the Bangladesh program which finds the same kind of results. So I think there's compelling evidence that at least in this population, people were in a poverty trap. Now, then you can, but as I said, what's very nice about randomized controlled trials is precisely that you control the intervention. You choose the intervention. You work with your partners to design a research that will teach you the most. So while this was the intervention as conceived had all these different elements. There was the hand-holding, the asset, the cash, the small cash support. What happens if you remove all of them and just give them the asset? And we could do that experiment in Ghana, and we find that that has really, if you give them assets, they get goats basically, most of them, and if you do that, that has really no effect. You end up with more livestock, but nothing else. Your income doesn't go up. So it was not enough for these people to just get the asset. The hand-holding was important. And that's a nice feature of experimental design, that when you design the experiment, you already think of what are potential, after I learn that the program works, what's the next question that will arise? Can I do less? And can I save some money and therefore use it for more people? So the experiment was designed keeping in mind the possibility of dynamic learning. And so you can keep updating the program, changing it to see if you can, to identify exactly what are you looking for, what you are looking for. Another question is the psychology part of it important? Is it important that was it so much just the the cash and the training, or was there something psychological, really deeply psychological about it? So one thing that we could do is we could again elaborate the experiment. We created a bag factory in Ghana where they produced 120,000 bags. So it's not a small experiment, a large experiment, where and the idea was, we will give them the training, we'll give them the inputs, we'll buy them the bags from them. So they had no risk, no capital problem, no lack of training. So it was just whether or not they were, and we see that when those who got the graduation program, the people who were, got the encouragement, who felt, richer, or who were richer, who felt richer, and they were actually, even though they were actually working harder already, they are the ones who were much more productive in producing bags. So the people who were, they were the people who, because they got the asset, they were already working harder, they had already had other businesses. But in fact, it's the people who were working harder as a result of getting the asset, who also, when they got the opportunity of making more money, were the ones who were more willing to do it. That's sort of the opposite of, I think, what basic economic models will tell you, which is that, when you may have some money, you value your time more, so you do less about producing these bags. In fact, they did more. They were more enthusiastic. So this suggests that, in fact, this vicious cycle of getting depressed, because you are a failure, you get depressed, that makes you unproductive. And if you are unproductive, then, of course, you stay poor. So I think that idea that it's psychological interventions and that the fact that the psychological mechanisms at play is key. Now, of course, all of this is a little bit abstract from the point of view of Spain. There's happening somewhere else. These are poor people who are much poorer than any poor people in Spain. Nonetheless, I think it's very useful to think about the mechanisms, the fact that when you're doing inclusion, to think about what are the barriers you are thinking about, what's stopping these people, what is your hope? I think what this conversation, the reason I go through the example is to highlight that the hope is a big one, which is that these people will, if you give them an opportunity, they will actually liberate themselves from the extreme poverty that they're in, and that they will, and the mechanisms are important ones, which is that they feel disempowered and therefore unproductive. I think so. In that sense, in a lateral sense, I think this is very important for Spain. Okay, let me switch to a topic that's more directly connected to Spain, which is the question of take-up of social programs. And the reference on this slide is to Ronald Reagan, who was a kind of a hero of the right wing in the U.S., and who one of his great political moves was to describe this largely mythical welfare queen, a woman who lived on welfare but who had so many ways to cheat the welfare system that she got really rich. So welfare queen. And so it's, and I think that if you take the experience of most countries, the truth is the opposite, which is that you have to, instead of people cheating the welfare system, they let themselves be deprived of the welfare system. And that's much more the problem that most countries face. These are non-take-up rates in different countries. So those numbers should impress you. But these are true. In Indonesia, we worked with a program which paid people roughly 1/6 of their annual income for 6 years. And the take-up rate among the poorest people there was 60%. So it's not a rich country phenomenon. It's one that's true everywhere. And I think, sorry, I should just say, and you might, and what's nice about, nicer, at least it makes academics excited about this question is, what's stopping them? This is free money. You're offering people free money, why aren't they taking them? And I think there are many different potential explanations. One is information. People may not know what's on offer. We find, at least in Indonesia, that's a significant piece of it. But also there's a transaction cost. There's a very nice study in India about, and transaction cost real and imaginary. So in India, there's a very nice study showing that people actually assumed that they will have to pay a bribe to get the program. So they wouldn't go because they thought that if I apply, then I'll have to pay a bribe. In fact, when an NGO went and applied for them, they got the money, they didn't have to pay a bribe, but they were so deeply cynical about the system that they didn't want to apply because they assumed that they'll never get it without paying a bribe, and they couldn't pay the bribe. So I think there is a sense in which, I think real and imaginary transaction costs. So one should be very aware of the fact that it's not the cost itself, but what people think of as being difficult. And those are different things. If you've never worked on filled a form on the computer, it's a totally paralyzing thought. So I think it's worth keeping in mind that. And there could be stigma. There could also be, some of these people might be worried that, they might have some hidden income, maybe still not enough to make them poor, non-poor, but they might be worried that if they applied, there'll be an investigation and their hidden income will be revealed and they'll get punished. So I think there's all kinds of concerns that make people not take up programs. There's a nice experiment in the US which sort of focuses on stigma. Let me actually do it in two parts, but also on transaction costs. So the first RCT was one where people were, this was the food, basically, this is food support program. It's a program that, so the population they looked at were people who were in the Medicaid, which is the government's healthcare support program for the low-income population, so they were probably eligible for SNAP as well. Most of them were. And one group was given information, they may be eligible, one group was given information and help in, so with the transaction costs, and you can see that, 6% were actually taking up SNAP. That's a number that should really impress you. These were mostly eligible people. 90% were eligible, 6% were taking advantage of it. When you gave them the help, the information, it went to 10. When you gave them the help, it went to 17. Important point is both that the information was a constraint. Some people didn't think they were eligible. Some people had the information but thought that felt the costs were too high. And I think the other side of it is that the 83% still didn't take it up. And so that's just the beginning of the challenge in a sense. You now know that the obvious hypotheses have been dealt with, what is left. So I'd say a little bit more about the stigma. One of the things that they also did was they replaced, so a lot of these people thought that they would go to the grocery counter and have to count out stamps, because a long time ago food support was given in the form of food stamps. You had little green stamps and you had to count them out to pay. But that was abolished a long time ago. Right now, you get your benefits in a credit card, which looks like any other credit card. But the people who were not taking it didn't know that. So they thought they'll be humiliated at the supermarket when they pay with these little green stamps. And when you showed them actually the way you actually pay for it, they were much more willing to take it up. So again, there are many, many steps in this process of winning this battle, but I think being open-minded about what are the different mechanisms, listening to them, listening to the, asking them, why didn't you take it up? What do they say? I think some of them are, may very well be really afraid that, if they didn't take it, they might be, if they reveal that they were trying to hide their hidden income, maybe the government will put them in jail or something. Again, reassuring people that, the information won't be used anywhere else, getting the information being collected by SEMFI rather than by the government, that's a good trick because, they might be less nervous about revealing the information to SEMFI. I think all of those are important. I think the main lesson we have learned is that, you'll be surprised by the things that matter and don't matter. And when you actually find the right lever, you might get all the way up to 80%, but it might be some time before you find the right lever. I think that's both the optimistic and the negative, pessimistic side. This is another one. I think it's an interesting example. So in France, there's a particular intervention where people were offered a 1-hour consultation with unemployed people were offered with a social security member, either face-to-face or over the phone. And, you went through, a lot of, what social services you can apply for. You go through a list of them. You can do it on the phone. If then you're seen as you're eligible, and what can you get? You can get both information and assistance with applying. So people very clearly here, the big effect comes from, if you get a letter saying that you are eligible, that does very little. If you actually physically meet, that does a lot more. It's again, I hope this continues, because you don't know whether the physical meeting works because it reassures people, or because it's just a better way to provide information, and they can't read. And I think again, refining the hypothesis as we go, doing more experiments to build on the previous one, while updating policy. It's not that we should keep policy fixed till we know the exact answer. We should change policy, but also keep an option for updating our knowledge. I think all of this is sort of lead up to saying that, in a sense, there is actually, I think, in Spain, given this government's commitment to, using the European Union's money to create a learning path. I think this is an exciting moment for social policy in Spain. It's an exciting moment for us who work with these kinds of, who want partners who want to do that, partners who care about good models of learning. And I think that there are lots of potential experiments. Last night at dinner, we discussed some new possible interventions, but the general point is that this is a great, going back to when we were having the panel discussion with the Prime Minister, I said that, you want to sit with the evidence, sit with people who think about the evidence, but not just the evidence from the RCTs. You're going to do the RCTs maybe, but sit with them to see what could be going wrong. Ask some questions, go out and collect some data, come up with good hypotheses, talk to NGOs, talk to churches. Everybody, there are lots of partners who you have and who have knowledge. And that the knowledge, they have knowledge doesn't mean that they know the exact answer. It might be that they get 5% of it right, but 5% is better than 0. So I think being open-minded, being willing to engage with lots of partners, being able to come up with interesting hypotheses, it's both, I think, as important a problem as you'll ever deal with. This is, after all, we're talking about, major social deprivation for the poorest people in Spain, but also intellectually it's exciting, because I think I think what we've learned over the last 20 years of doing randomized controlled trials is precisely that there is, or 25 years maybe, that there's lots of surprises around the corner, good and bad, but often good, and that there is knowledge that you will eventually, you'll say, oh yeah, of course, that's why it works. But it's not, that's not where started. And I think with that in mind, I think it's great that we are coming together in this enterprise of creating an institutional basis for these conversations I was describing, where you talk to many people, you aggregate the data. All those things are nice, but they happen much better if there is an institutional form for it. I think by creating this partnership with CEMFI, which is one of the leading institutions in economics in Europe, I think you're creating a basis for a kind of a sustained set of conversations where you ask questions, you design hypotheses, you may even be able to do small, very small experiments where you try out an idea, you see how people are reacting to it. Like, for example, I said briefly that when we asked people, we just went and asked people, did you want a lump sum or not? That was a very simple survey to do, but when you do it, you learn something. So everybody says we want a lump sum. So, I mean, that was surprising to us, but we learned something. So there are many easy, quick things to do, but having a focus by academics who have the space to think about options is also critical. And we in JPAL, of course, are committed to doing that and are excited to partner with. And then the other piece of this is to already start thinking, suppose I had that evidence, what will I do? And recognizing that some of the evidence will be very clear-cut, very high quality. Some of the evidence will be of mixed quality, but I think it's worth being realistic about, not every one of these RCTs will give you a clean answer. Some of them will be not powered enough. They won't have a big enough sample to give you a clear answer. Being realistic about, once I get the data, what do I do? And making a plan for that, to plan to use whatever information is available, try to use it, even if it's not clear-cut. There might be some correlations that are really suggestive. Looking for those, trying to have a plan to use the evidence, feed it back, take the big successes and run with them, take the big failures and try to move policy away from there, take the ones where there isn't real clarity, but still try to distill the lessons. And I think that process of both scaling up, scaling down, and scaling sideways is critical and that we hope that this the idea of a lab will indeed do that. It will do, as I said, all of this. It will diagnose the problem. It will review the existing evidence. It will help in design the programs. It will design the evaluations. It will analyze the results. But also it will take responsibility for, when the results are here, to take ownership of them. That's critical, to convey the results to the world, to the European community, to inspire the rest of Europe to take on a similar journey, but also to the world of the people who are interested in what works and what doesn't. I think all of those, to work with the government, the process of scaling up from even a large experiment is not obvious. There's always things that change when you do it in bigger scale, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. But whatever it is, you want to be mindful and involved all through. And one of the things we attempt to do in JPAL is to do that, to live through the entire life cycle of this process. And I'm optimistic that this lab will do that. We have experience of this. There was the Peruvian Ministry of Education, IPA, or one of our sister organizations, JPAL, did exactly this. We did, 9 RCTs with them, and 3 of them eventually we were recognized to be at scale. And this was exactly a process, multiple years, multiple interventions. We've worked with the government of Tamil Nadu, which is one of the states in India. We have a similar lab there, where again they fund a set of evaluations on topics of interest to them, and also broadly use those moments to also build broader understanding of evidence within the government. And we've sort of been, just to end, let me say that, we work in different sectors in Europe, so, hopefully this will be a part of an even broader partnership where we eventually have some connection with many of the other branches of the government. These are examples of what we're doing. I'm going to, I think you get a sense of where I'm coming out of. I'm going to say thank you and stop here. Thank you.
For your...
Thank you. Thank you.
Hola.
Hola. Okay.
Hola.
Hola. Thank you, Mr. Banerjee, for your conference.
Thank you, Mr. Banerjee, for your conference.
We have received many questions for you. Unfortunately, we don't have time to ask you all of them, but we have made a selection. First category of questions about child poverty. The first question is from Carles López from Plataforma de la Infancia, and it says, what the evidence tell us about the best way to reduce child poverty?
So to be honest, I think that the evidence tells us that, child poverty is a result, typically, especially a country like Spain, of parental poverty. And I think that what we know is more that when parents have more economic stress, they cut back on things that are valuable to children. So I think it's very important to realize that, that to protect children, we have to make parents less subject to economic stress, because I think they are often, if you look at the quality of the nutrition, it goes down very quickly. I think that's one of the pieces of evidence we have, is that families buy, and not necessarily cheaper food, often under economic stress they don't have time, so they buy low quality food in little shops or restaurants or something, or buy a packet of chips, or it's quality of the nutrition that's often low.
The second question about child poverty as well. It comes from Catalina Perazzo from Save the Children. It's about the main challenges you have seen scaling up public policies, what you have learned through evidence. I mean, the challenges of scaling up, learnings from public.
I understand.
Yeah, it's the main challenges you have seen when you to scale up through public policies, what you have learned from evidence.
What you have learned from?
From evidence. Your findings from evidence to scaling up in creating public policies.
I'm not sure I understand the question. I'm really sorry.
Yeah, well, yeah, okay. So the next question then. It's about data. Maria Hernández from Universidad de Alicante. In your opinion, how important is to combine administrative data with randomized controlled trials?
Extremely important. I mean, data collection is expensive. I think where we can, we should use administrative data, especially, and the pandemic made that very clear. It's also just physically difficult to collect data. So I think administrative data is wonderful. It's not, I think we need all the data protection laws we can to be designed for that. I think in some ways, I think we haven't fully got there yet, because I think there is a sense in which I think what the risks are of sharing data, what are the protocols for using them carefully, those are important parts of the work. And part of, I hope administrative data gets used, I also hope that people are reassured that the data is not being used, or is being used in responsible ways.
I have another question regarding data, and it comes from Nicolás Forteza from Banco de España. And there he says, are there any big data sources that could help in the design, implementation, and evaluation of RCTs?
Yes, for example, one of the things we work with, I mean, I tell you my own experience working with the Indonesian government. One of the things that when they do a nationwide census, you can place questions on it. And you work closely with, that's one great opportunity actually, because a few questions on something that's going to happen in any case, that's extremely cheap because they're going to collect the data in any case. And it's, so I think it's an amazing opportunity when the government is collecting some kind of census or large survey to place questions on it. This is something we do often, but it really has enormous benefits.
Okay, thank you very much for your answers.